Well, good afternoon. It's good to see you all this afternoon. Appreciate you all braving the heat wave to come out here, but appreciate the fact that we've got air conditioning. It's not quite so hot in here. Appreciate the shade. Don't have to worry about a sunburn while we're inside. I don't think that these bulbs have quite that much UV power, so I think we're good. But I appreciate you all being here. Hope you all had restful afternoons. I guess I should apologize right off the bat to Everett and Zima and Michael, because we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things we were talking about in the class in the back. Thought I'd bring it out to you all. So I hope they're not too bored. Maybe they can whisper to each other about what they think I'm going to say next. See how well they remember our class, I suppose. But I wanted to start, ask a question. Maybe it's a bit accusatory. I don't necessarily mean it that way. But just ponder for a second. Are you a liar? I don't know. Are you a liar? We were talking about this back in the high school class. We've been talking about this broader discussion of wise living, going through some of the Proverbs thematically, and specifically we've been talking about honesty. And there was this one proverb we looked at that said, "Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness utters deceit." And I'm talking about that. And it's kind of striking, isn't it, that there's this proverb in the Bible that if you pay attention to it, is pretty straightforward. It's a proverb of definitions. What he's saying is you are a false witness if you utter deceit, and you are honest if you speak the truth. It's axiomatic. It's a truism, right? If you say something that's true, then you tell the truth. And if you say something that's not true, then it's deceit. So why on earth do we need a proverb that tells us something that is by itself the definition of itself? I thought that was interesting. I thought that was worth a little bit of conversation, so we were talking about that some. But before we jump back to that particular thing, I think it's worth kind of asking another question. How many people do you know, or how many times have you heard somebody make an argument to the effect of, well, I may have done that, but that's not who I am, right? Oh, I may do these certain things, but that's not really who I am, right? I've made this mistake, but that's not who I am, right? That somehow the things that we do are separate from who we are. And if we want to talk about it philosophically, I think this is a little bit of Gnosticism, right? This separation, this duality between our spiritual self and our physical self. And the Gnostics, the specific word, gnosis, knowledge, it's about this special knowledge, not just any knowledge, but a particularly peculiar insight into ancient things is the way they would talk about it. And Gnosticism really didn't come about till the 2nd century, but you see some of the early imprints of it even in the 1st century. And John, particularly in his epistles, addressed some of this. And it's broad. It can mean a lot of different things, right? It could be defined a lot of different ways, but generally it's this idea of duality, these two different parts of who you are. And one of the things that they said, particularly relating to the gospel, is that it challenges the idea of a savior in the flesh. Because the flesh is corrupt and the spirit is good, and so there's no way that God could take on the form of flesh because it's corrupt. And so he had to stay separate from that. And so they have different attitudes about that, right? That you can't combine these two things. The flesh is fundamentally corrupt, the spirit is good, and they would kind of talk about it like that. And so they would argue that Jesus couldn't have been in the flesh. And so in John 1:1, 1 John 1:1, he says, that which was seen from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our own eyes, which we have gazed upon and touched with our own hands. The word of life, right? Kind of emphatically making the case from the beginning. No, this is how it was. Now, kind of ironically, Gnosticism goes both ways, right? Because the spirit is pure and the flesh is weak, you have to purify yourself. Or it goes the other way, where they say because the spirit is pure, but it's separate from the flesh, you can do whatever you want in the flesh as long as your spirit remains pure. So there's like a separation there. And they argue it both ways. Why is that important? I don't know if there's really much about modern day Gnosticism. I don't know if that's a particular worldview that people hold to now. But it does seem like this dualistic idea does exist, right? People are defined not by what they do, but how they feel. That there's this inner trait about who they are that's really what matters. And that's the argument for all sorts of things that people do. Maybe one of the clearest and saddest examples of that is the rise of transgenderism, right? That people say, well, I don't really feel like this on the inside, and my outward body is not a reflection of the gender that I feel like I have. And so now there's this tension, and I have to correct that because my body doesn't define who I am. It's this inward part of me. And it's really kind of sad to think about people that are so mixed up and confused that that's the result they come to, isn't it? That they have to mutilate their body because they're somehow so disjointed. But I think it's a reflection of this idea that we see maybe in like a big deal in that way, but also more generally in a daily basis, the way people talk about their feelings versus who they are, right? That there's this separation. Plato's Republic has the allegory of the cave. People chained to the wall of a cave, and they can only see the shadows of an image cast from a fire. They see the fuzzy reflections of the true image, and they cannot possibly imagine what is outside the cave or what the sun looks like because they've never seen it. All they see are these reflections, these images. And that's sometimes the way that we talk about this. This very image or allegory is used to help explain the Gnostic worldview. That we're trapped inside a material world that is broken and fallen, and we cannot understand what is outside it except through some sort of separate spiritual existence, right? There's something different that is what really matters. A little bit of technical stuff about that, maybe. But what that means, practically, whether or not you care about Gnosticism or not, the idea is that that's this worldview, right? That you can do things and that's not who you are. You can say things, but that's not who you are. That whatever behaviors you have, those are not the things that define you. But the fact of the matter is, what we do is who we are. We are actually spirit and flesh as one. And what we do is part of who we are, and we can't somehow pass it off as some corrupt flesh that's different than who we are. Our behavior matters. And so as axiomatic as whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness utters deceit it's a necessary axiom that if you tell the truth, you are honest. And if you bear false witness, you are full of deceit. And the world may try to pretend like that's not the case, but it simply is. It's a vitally important, axiomatic, obvious sort of truth because it confronts us with the truth of who we are. And so we ask the question, are you a liar, right? How many times do you have to lie to be a liar? We talked about this Wednesday night. How many times do you have to lie to be a liar? Well, how many times do you have to murder somebody to be a murderer? How many times do you have to bake a cake to be a baker? Now, sometimes we define these things as in like recurrence, right? You have to do it a bunch habitually to be defined by that thing. But quite simply, if you look up the definitions of the terms, in its strictest sense, you tell a lie, you're a liar. And you bake a cake, you're a baker. May not be a good one. May not do it frequently, but you have now baked a cake. And if you murder somebody, you are a murderer. And so telling one lie, quite frankly, is enough to bear the moniker of liar. We don't like it, because nobody wants to be a liar, I don't think. Nobody wants to have that label plastered on them. Nobody wants to be accused of their wrongdoing and having that in front of them. That's the case. So are you a liar, right? Well, we just had a scripture reading in Matthew chapter 7. And I want to go back to it because he's talking about here in Matthew 7, Jesus is in the Sermon on the Mount, about the false prophets, those you have to be aware of. And he gives a test, right? How do you know that they're a false prophet? These false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves, right? Well, he says in Matthew 7 and verse 16, you will recognize them by their fruits. And he poses a question. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, right? Are figs gathered from thistles? Every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. How do you know it's a good tree, though? Because it's bearing good fruit. So it's not possible for a good tree to bear bad fruit, because if a bad tree bore good fruit, it's not a bad tree, it's a good tree, right? Let's put it another way. How do you know it's an apple tree? Because there's an apple on it, right? And how do you know it's an orange tree? Because there's an orange on it. How do you know they're a false prophet? You'll know them by their fruits, by the things that they do, by the way that they act, the way that they live. What you do matters, and it is part of this definition of who you are. It's an easy test. Well, in theory, right? Some people are pretty good at trying to deceive others about who they are, but you watch them. Look at how they interact with people. Look at whether or not they bear the fruit of the Spirit. What kind of fruit do they bear? That's how you know what kind of people they are. But he goes on in verse 21. Jesus continues this idea. He says in verse 21 of Matthew 7, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" What's his point? They say that they did these things. They're claiming that they did all these things. They think that they are saved because of the things that they have said. But what's the point? The ones who have done the will of my Father are the ones who will be saved. You have to bear the fruit of the kingdom to be a part of the kingdom. That's the point. And this passage is pretty sobering, right? The way that it confronts people, the lost people here who think that they are saved, who say that they proclaim Jesus as Lord. But in the end, what they said was not congruent with what they did. They didn't bear the fruit they were supposed to. They practiced lawlessness. People want to talk about faith and works, arguments about that. Don't claim to know the ins and outs of all those arguments and the way that people talk about it, but I do think it's worth noting that here in Matthew 7, out of the mouth of Jesus the Messiah himself is a call to do, to behave a certain way, to live according to the upward call of Jesus. That's what we're called to do, to live a certain way, to behave a certain way. He goes on and continues the theme in Matthew 7, verse 24. He says, everyone then who enters these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell. And great was its fall. What's he saying? How do you know that you are living wisely? How do you know that you are part of the kingdom? By whether or not you've done the things that Jesus said. Pretty familiar analogy here of what wisdom and folly look like, isn't it? Obedience versus ignorance. He says, be wise, be obedient. So, that's kind of the first big lesson, right? What you do matters. We can't hide from what we do. But that kind of begs two problems, doesn't it? First one is liars go to hell. And if you tell a lie, you're a liar. So we all go to hell, right? If we told a lie. And that's problematic. And I think we should address that. But the second kind of problem that came up in the class that was asked, I think is interesting. It's something worth considering. Is if you only have to do the bad deed once, tell the lie once to be a liar, then do we only have to go to church once or be baptized once to be a Christian, right? And now that's who you are and you're saved. So let's talk about those two problems. Let's talk about the first one first, about whether or not we all are doomed to hell because we've told a lie and we're liars. Well, I would think that because we're here, we understand a little bit about Christianity and the gospel and the good news of Jesus and what it does for us. And I want to talk about that. Because yes, we as liars, people who have told even just one lie, are deserving of hellfire. As brutal and unforgiving as that sounds. But yet it's a harsh and true reality of what we all face because of our own sin. And I think there's a whole other lesson here about why lying is such a big deal to God. And maybe we'll address that at another time. But suffice it to say that God hates lying because God doesn't lie. It's completely contrary to who he is. And so there's this repercussion. What do we do about the hell problem? The lying problem. And of course, lying just becomes the foil for any of these conversations of sin, any sinful behavior that we can have, right? We talked about this actually a couple weeks ago in Hebrews chapter 10. It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible because it deals specifically with this problem of guilt, right? He's talking about the problem of guilt. And he says, look, under the old law, you had to offer these animal sacrifices. Every time you sinned, another sacrifice. You had to offer sacrifices for the sins you didn't know you commit that you may have committed without realizing. You had to kill the animal, watch it bleed out on the altar, and burn it, right? Sometimes you had to eat some of it. Sometimes the priest had to eat some of it. But you had to take an animal that was yours, and you had to slit its throat and watch the blood spill out on the altar every time you sinned. Pretty brutal, unforgiving confrontation of your sin, right? You tell a lie, you do one bad thing, another bad thing, then it's time to go to the temple, right? And you bring your animal, you watch the life fade out of its eyes as it bleeds out every time. That's a lot of guilt. That's a lot of guilt. I mean, we feel bad enough putting to death a sick old dog that's dying from cancer. Consider the young lamb, it's spotless, as an image of its perfection in contrast with your sin that you have to put to death. It's a brutal system because it makes you confront your sin, right? That's the idea. And so they were reminded constantly of these sins. And yet that's the power of the gospel, of what Jesus did for us. One sacrifice for all. No longer this guilt and this reminder. So he's talking about in Hebrews 10. We have forgiveness. Guilt removed because of Jesus. And so even though we are sinners, who have continued to sin, who have done things that are wrong, Jesus' sacrifice removes the guilt, it cleanses us, it purifies us, and we are no longer liars, right? Because he has made us pure. And so, are you a liar? Well, hopefully not. Even if you have told a lie, you are made new and fresh and cleansed by the blood of Jesus. And so now you are a new creature in him, walking in newness of life. But then that gets us back to the second problem, right? So you just have to be baptized, go to church once, now you're a Christian. I think this is worth considering as well. Because there's a lot of people who think that. A lot of people who think that's the thing to become a Christian. If you're a Christian, you're saved. So we talked about a liar in its strictest definition is somebody who tells a lie. What's a Christian in its strictest definition? So I tried to, look it up in a dictionary. Definition of a liar, definition of Christian. Definition of a liar fit, right? Somebody who tells a lie, somebody who lies. Christian, it said someone who's been baptized. It's basically what it said. So I don't know if they maybe I need to talk to, a dictionary company and have them listen to the sermon. Maybe redefine their definition of Christian. I don't know. But basically, they kind of missed the boat on this too. What is a Christian, though? What does it mean to follow Christ? Sure, baptism. But what is it? Well, in John 8, Jesus said, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. What does Jesus say makes you a disciple? If you abide in his words. In Luke 9:23, Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. You're abiding in the words of Jesus. You are taking up your cross daily and following after him. In John 13:34, it says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So being a Christian is abiding in the word, denying yourself and taking up the cross daily and following Jesus. It is loving one another. John 15:8, he says, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. Bearing fruit. Luke 14:26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my people. You love God first. John 14:15, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. What does it mean to be a Christian? From the words of Jesus himself, right? It's love. It's abiding in the word. It's a daily taking up of your cross. It's loving each other. It's loving God first. It's obedience. And what are the commandments that Jesus gives? Matthew 22:36, they said, teacher, which is the greatest commandment of the law? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. We talked this morning about what it means to love your neighbor. Appreciate Brother Madrigal's lesson on that. But the whole idea is that you love God first with all your might, with all your heart, with all your soul, and you love your neighbor as yourself. You want to boil it down? That's what it comes down to. How are you a Christian? What's interesting is, in Matthew chapter 5, because those are Deuteronomy passages, right? That's Deuteronomy 6. That's the old law. But Jesus says in Matthew 5:17, don't think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. And in fact, what he goes on to do is 6 times in Matthew chapter 5 is to say, you have heard it said, and then he quotes the law and says, but I say unto you. His whole point is to say, you've misunderstood the commandments from the beginning. It's not about the commandment. It's about your heart. It's not about just not doing the bad thing. It's about giving your heart to God. That's what it's about. That's who you're supposed to be. And that's the lesson here. That's what he tells them in Matthew 22, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. It isn't just about what we do, right? It's actually more than that. It's about giving him our hearts. And that's the trap that we fall into. Because we say, okay, you do the one thing wrong, you're now a sinner, right? Tell one lie, you're a liar. And so now it's just, well, don't lie, and then you're saved, right? Well, that doesn't get you very far. Because you're going to continue to do things that are wrong, and you're going to continue to be in guilt because of that. The thing that redeems you is attaching yourself to the blood of Jesus. And what Jesus said is, I want your heart. I don't just want you to live a certain way. I want you to give me everything you have. And so what does it mean to be a Christian? Well, how do you become somebody who is saved? Yeah, you got to do all the things. You have to be obedient to all the things. You have to do all the things that are associated with Christianity, right? The things that you do are part of what define you. But where do those things come from? They don't come from rote repetition of doing things because you have to. They come from your heart. And how do you know they come from your heart? Because you do the things that come from your heart that are supposed to come from your heart regularly, right? The fruit that you bear. The fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, hope, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. If those are the things that define you, rather than these misbehaviors of sin, that's how you know that you've given God your heart. You'll know him by the fruit. You'll know yourself by the fruit that you bear. And so we go through this honesty stuff in the class, and you read these proverbs, and this one in particular that we talked about tonight. It's like axiomatic, right? Well, yeah, of course. Deceitfulness, lies, same thing. But it is so easy for us to somehow play a game with ourselves. Yes, even us who are Christians, who are trying to be Christians, it's easy for us to play a game with ourselves and say, I may do this bad thing, but I'm really this other person. And my heart doesn't actually like this bad thing. But if your heart doesn't really like that bad thing, then why do you keep doing it? We say, I'm not really that person who tells lies, but you keep telling lies. Do you see the problem? Our behavior flows from our heart and our worldview and who we are. We have to clean up the things that we do because it's a reflection of what's inside our heart. Because the two things go together. They're not separate. One is a reflection of the other. And God doesn't just want one of those things. He wants both of them. Which, by the way, is because he gave us both of them, right? Jesus didn't just tell us to live a certain way. He didn't just say, I love you enough to die for you, so that's good enough, right? I could do that because that's the kind of God that I am, but I don't have to actually do it because I know that I'm. That's not what he did. He actually came to the earth, actually took on the form of human, and actually died on the cross, and was actually raised from the dead. And because he actually did those things, we have something to believe in. Hopefully that's helpful tonight. It's challenging, I think, but Christianity is challenging, isn't it? To have to confront who you are, to honestly reflect. I mean, you all know, I love the way James says that in James 1 about the perfect law of liberty, right? The man who looks at himself in the mirror goes away forgetful. He's just a hearer of the word. But the doers are the ones who see who they are, right? They see the natural man. They're confronted with who they are. Are you going to change? Are you going to be different because of it? Now, I don't know that any of you all have any sort of evil that you're harboring within you or something like that. But I do know that it is valuable to constantly reflect, to take an accounting of who we are and the way that we live, because what we do is a reflection of what's in our heart. And as much as we strive to love God and to be like him and earnestly serve him, it is really easy for us to pretend like we have some sort of behavior or something within us that isn't right, and yet it's okay because that's not really who we are, right? It's just not the way that it works, though. We should constantly be trying to get better. And of course, that gap between our efforts to become better and who we need to be is filled by the grace of God. As long as we've given him our heart, and as long as we are changing and growing and becoming more like he would want us to be. It's a hard lesson, but hopefully it's a helpful one. I'll be honest, as I was writing this, I kind of thought of it as an encouraging lesson. It kind of feels a little bit maybe not so encouraging, but I mean it to be encouraging, like to uplift everybody, motivate each other, think about what God has done for us and Jesus has done for us. Preached a little bit harder than I thought it would, but I feel like that happens a lot with the Bible. You start reading, you're like, oh, this is great stuff, and then you're like, oh boy, yeah. But I hope this is helpful to you all tonight. Think about who you are, how your behavior reflects who you are. If you recognize that you are not a Christian, either because you have not been baptized or because you haven't given your heart to God the way that you need to, we would love to baptize you and encourage you, pray for you. If you simply just want us to pray for you and help you in any way, we always offer that opportunity as well. If we can do anything for you, please let us know as we stand and sing this song.